Okay. Zoomers, if you can see what's on the board, if you can't, it says stress. And that's our lesson today. What is stress? Stress is a feeling of emotional or physical tension. It can come from any event or thought that makes you feel frustrated, angry, or nervous. Stress is your body's reaction to a challenge or a demand. In short bursts, stress can be positive, such as when it helps you to avoid danger or meet a deadline. So, what are some of the symptoms? Aches and pains, chest pain, or feeling like your heart's racing, exhaustion or trouble sleeping, headaches, dizziness or shaking, high blood pressure, muscle tension, jaw clenching, stomach or digestive problems. So what is stress? What is the definition of stress? Well, there's three. The first definition of stress is called acute stress, ACUTE. And it's an intense, unpleasant, dysfunctional reaction beginning with shortly after an overwhelming traumatic event and lasting for less than a month. Now, if it lasts more than a month, it's called a familiar name. It's called post-traumatic stress disorder. The second type of stress is episodic. In other words, episodic acute stress. It occurs when someone gets frequent bouts of acute stress. So this first one was about a traumatic experience that caused you to have this, didn't last more than a month. The second one is one that keeps coming back, reoccurs all the time. Reoccurs like boom, gone, boom, gone. And then the third type of stress is called chronic stress. It's consistent sense of feeling pressure and overwhelmed over a long period of time. Treatments for this include psychiatry and psychology. So, what happens to your body when you become stressed? When you feel threatened, your nervous system responds by releasing a flood of stress hormones, including adrenaline and cortisol, which rouse the body for emergency action. Your heart pounds faster, your muscles tighten, blood pressure rises, breath quickens, and your senses become sharper. So, how do you relieve stress? How do you relieve anxiety? Well, here's some ways. Number one way to relieve stress, exercise. Exercise is one of the most important things you can do to combat stress. Consider supplements. Several supplements promote stress and anxiety reduction. Light a candle. Somehow that gives you some stress relief. Reduce your caffeine intake. Good idea. Write down what's causing you to stress. Here's one I like. Chew gum. Spend some time with friends and family. And the last one, I like even more. Laugh a lot. Laugh when under stress. You know, I always said sometimes you got to laugh to keep from crying. Laugh is antidote to stress. How do you prepare yourself for the stresses of life? That's what you were trying to do. Prepare yourself for the stresses and anxiety. If you've ever spent any time in an airport, then you know how busy and crazy and complicated it can be. And think about all the things that you don't see. Now, today's lesson is Ephesians 6:10 through 20. The things you don't see in an airport, the inner details of doing intensive security checks, is something you don't see. Or matching up thousands of pieces of baggage with the right traveler for the right airplane. Or monitoring weather conditions all over the world to make sure you're safe. It's pretty incredible that millions of people fly all over the world every year with few disruptions. How do airports do it? Well, did you know that before a major airport opens, it has to undergo stress tests? An airport stress test is like a dress rehearsal for opening night on Broadway show. Recently, a young man named Andrew Curry participated in a stress test for an airport, a new airport in Berlin, Germany. It was the Berlin Brandenburg International Airport, and it was completed back in October 2020. It had a cost of $7 billion. And before they officially opened the doors to the public, they asked a few hundred volunteers each week to participate in a stress test to determine if the airport operations were working as they should. For example, do the signs in the terminal make sense? Are the security scanners effective? Is the baggage handling operation matching up the right bag with the right flight? Do the toilets work? Volunteers were asked to go through the whole process of acting as if they were taking a flight. They went up to the ticket counters, got their plane tickets, they went through security checkpoints, they bought overpriced food and magazines at airport kiosks. They checked airport message boards to confirm flight schedules. The challenge part was stress, meeting internal or external deadlines. So, what did the airport do? After doing all these mostly or fairly routine stuff, the airport authorities threw in a new challenge, a few new things, just like life. You get up one morning, you go out to do something, and wham, something gets you, and all of a sudden you've got to react to it. Well, that's what they wanted at the airport. In order to prepare the employees for any challenges that they might face, they secretly arranged a number of small crises. Certain passengers were requested to act like spoiled, high-maintenance VIPs. You know, the ones that get up and demand that their ticket is taken first. Flights got canceled at the last minute. That's a big one. Hundreds of bags got rerouted to another airport. A security scanner suffered a major glitch. All these surprises were arranged to test the airport's employees' resourcefulness and attitude in the face of problems. Would they rise to the challenge? Or would they react in anger, lashing out at the frustrated passengers crowded around them? The demand part of this, on top of the challenge part, was meeting internal and external avoidance of danger. How do you think you would do in that situation? Do you get a headache just trying to think about it? This article might make you think about how useful a stress test really is. What if you could get a stress rehearsal that would prepare you for the challenges and heartbreaks and battles of life? What if you could get a game plan that would train you? The military, the police, firefighters, EMTs, emergency entities all do this. School systems, large and small businesses, state and local government, churches, and large events do this. The what-if scenarios. In Ephesians 4, the Apostle Paul was trying to get people from every segment of the ancient Roman world to envision a new kind of community, a community based on equality and sacrificial love, something that had never been seen before. Ephesians 4 and 5 and part of 6 also challenge believers to envision a new way of relating to one another. Paul challenges Jesus' followers to treat others the way Jesus would, with compassion, kindness, respect, and humility. And if this new way of life isn't challenging enough, remember that the followers of Jesus endured hostility from fellow citizens and persecution by the Roman government. How would they respond? Would the pressures to fit in, to conform to their culture, cause them to lose their cool as well as lose their faith? Paul knew the struggles they were facing. When he became a follower of Christ, he lost his position as a Pharisee. He lost his status and security. We can assume that he lost the respect of his friends and colleagues. For the rest of his life, he endured harassment, persecution, beatings, imprisonment in order to share the faith of Jesus Christ. And in this message, Paul shares with them and us his secret for facing down any challenge without losing faith. He begins by writing in Ephesians 6:10. He says, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers and against authorities, against powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything, to stand firm." According to Paul, first step of facing down any stress challenge is to learn to depend on God. Some of us live as if the only power we have to draw on is our own. And as if we were whipped before the battle even began. Remember that hilarious scene in the Old Testament in which David, the young shepherd boy about this tall, is going out to do battle with the giant Goliath. The king, Saul, says, "Okay, David, you can go out there," after telling him no, "but you got to wear my armor." Well, if you remember when Samuel anointed Saul as king, Saul was declared to be head and shoulders over everybody else in the country. He was tall. So he gives his armor to this little boy, and the little boy, David, he tries to go, but in vain. He can't even pack the armor. So he takes it off, and he goes out to face Goliath, and he tells Goliath, "You come to me with the sword and shield, but I come to you in the name of the Lord God of Israel, and he will give me victory this day." Well, you know the outcome. Young shepherd boy slew the giant warrior. Every one of us could go out and face the world wearing the armor of God. The difference in our lives would be extraordinary. Young people at school, as well as men and women on the job, battling testing and temptation, overcoming discouragement, standing up to the bullies of the world. Every person in this room and on this Zoom could leave this lesson with confidence that there is an unseen strength and power that goes with us. You may have seen this guy on TV. His name's Dr. Francis Collins. And he's pretty old, but he's the former director of the National Human Genome Research Institute and the current senior investigator of the medical genomics at that organization. He is one of the most has one of the most prestigious jobs in the science world. In an interview with PBS, he shares how his faith in God informs his scientific research. As a young man, Collins was an atheist. Many of his colleagues were atheists and agnostics, so few people challenged his beliefs. But Dr. Collins' atheism was challenged by his patient's faith. Collins says, some of my patients were clearly relying very heavily on their faith as a source of strength in circumstances that were pretty awful. They had terrible diseases from which they were probably not going to escape. And yet, instead of railing at God, they seemed to lean on their faith as a source of great comfort and reassurance. Collins began his journey to faith in Jesus Christ by witnessing the strength and comfort that God offers to those who are clothed in his love. To those who are clothed in his truth. To those who are clothed in his power. This is the armor of God Paul is referring to. It allows believers to face down the worst circumstances with strength and peace. That's step one, your preparation. Learn to depend on God. The second step for facing any stress challenges of life is to ask God to give you courage and confidence. Confidence and courage make such a difference in life. In verses 14 through 17 in our scripture, it reads like this: stand firm then on the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Effectiveness in life so often is determined by the twin qualities of courage and confidence. But where do courage and confidence come from? From basing your life on the truth of God and the character of God. And when you trust in God to lead you in wisdom, truth, and power each day, obstacles become opportunities to grow in faith. Enemies become opportunities to grow in character. Challenges become opportunities to grow in wisdom. Does faith in God mean you'll never experience fear? No. But it does mean that you will act with wisdom, character, and courage in spite of that fear. In Chuck Swindoll's book, Living Above the Level of Mediocrity, he tells a story about Bruce Larson. When Bruce Larson, who's a preacher, was a boy, his family attended a big Presbyterian church in downtown Chicago. Larson says his favorite moment in worship service was when the ushers passed the offering plate. The ushers in his childhood church were some of the most prominent businessmen and professional leaders in Chicago. But there was one particular usher who stood out to young Bruce Larson. Bruce's father pointed him out each week to make sure that little Bruce understood what an important man he was. This very special usher in Bruce Larson's childhood church was a man by the name of Frank Loich. During the Prohibition era of 1920 through 33, criminal gangs rose to power in many major American cities, and a few were more powerful or as feared as Al Capone. Capone and his gang infiltrated numerous Chicago businesses and political establishments. He and his men were ruthless and corrupt. Even the FBI wouldn't stand up to Capone. But Frank Loich, an elderly attorney, established the Chicago Crime Commission to clean up corruption in Chicago politics and break Capone's criminal organization. Loich knew that his work would put him in danger. Many police, public officials, and judges in Chicago were either on Capone's payroll or they were in fear for their lives if they opposed him. Loich and his family and friends were targets of numerous death threats, but Loich's faith would not allow him to sit by quietly and let criminals and corrupt politicians destroy his city. It was Frank Loich's uncompromising courage and perseverance that eventually led to Al Capone's arrest. Bruce Larson's dad never let a Sunday go by without pointing proudly to the elderly church usher who stood up to one of America's most feared gangsters. So the secret to dealing with any challenge is to learn to depend on God, to find our strength and courage and confidence in God. And finally, the secret to dealing with any challenge is to prepare yourself by opening yourself daily to the power and presence of God. That's what the armor of God is. Verses 18 through 20 read, "And prayer in spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all God's people. Pray also for me," Paul says, "that whenever I speak, words may be given me so that I will fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains." According to author Jay Strack, he wrote a book called Above and Beyond. He defines the word prepare. Prepare is a Latin word, pero, meaning to make complete, to point in the right direction, but most importantly, and to equip for battle. That's exactly what the armor of God and prayer do for a believer. They make us complete, they point us in the right direction, and they equip us for battle. But we have to prepare ourselves every day by prayer, by reading our Bible, by spending time in aligning our minds and priorities and habits and attitudes with the mind of Jesus. You will face suffering and challenges and spiritual battles in your life. Don't act surprised. It happens to everyone. God isn't going to protect you from every battle, but God is going to equip you for every battle. But you had to do your part. If you stood in front of a firing squad and they said to you, if you will deny Christ, we won't shoot. You got to know before you get there what you're going to do, because the stress will be overwhelming. The fear will be overwhelming. You got to know that you're going to do this before you ever get there. You got to prepare yourself for that day, even if it doesn't ever come. I don't know if you've seen this guy on TV or not. His name is Jocko Willink. He's a former Navy SEAL and a best-selling author. He wrote a book called How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. Jocko was a lieutenant commander. And in his SEAL Team 3 that he led, there was a guy named Chris Kyle. You may remember that name, American Sniper. They made a movie about it. Jocko's SEAL Team 3 was the most decorated special operations team in the United States. I mean, for the United States in Iraq. Jocko's training with the SEALs taught him, among other things, mental toughness, the ability to control his thoughts so that he didn't get distracted from his mission. One of his mental practices is to respond to any challenge or obstacle with one word. Now, like I said, I don't know if you've ever seen this guy before. He is one bad-looking dude. But when he talks, he makes sense. I mean, he's very competent, but he is very well trained. So he's telling us that to control your thoughts and how you respond to a challenge, he's selected one word that he always says. And I'll give you an example here. He selected the word good. Here's the example. Jeep broke down on a rescue mission. Good. Jocko suffered an injury during a covert operation. Good. Jocko didn't get the assignment for his team that he wanted. Good. Now you see what he's doing? The one-word response forces Jocko to look at a situation from a new perspective, to see it as an opportunity instead of a threat. It forces him to see positive, or to see the positives in negative situation. Jocko uses this one-word response to prepare himself ahead of time for a battle he might face. That's the kind of spiritual preparation Paul wants fellow believers to have, to see any adversity as an opportunity for doing good. Let me give you an example of that. From the book Bearing Witness, Stories of Martyrdom and Costly Discipleship, in the early part of the 20th century, in this book it writes that Japan officially annexed Korea. Japanese officials announced that on the very first day of every month, all Korean citizens would be required to bow down in worship to the shrine of the Japanese sun goddess. Anyone who didn't bow to the goddess could be beaten or arrested. Later, in 1930, a young Korean school teacher by An Il-suk was pressured by her school administrator to take part in the forced worship of Japanese sun goddess. However, An was a Christian. Her faith in Jesus made it possible for her to not to participate in this act. However, if she didn't participate in the act of pagan worship, she and her colleagues and students could become targets of persecution by the Japanese government. First day of the month came around. Everybody in school marched toward the Japanese sun god shrine. Anne could hear the students around her whispering, questioning if their Christian teacher would betray her faith in exchange for safety. When the order came to bow down, Anne stood up. Inside, she was terrified. At that moment, she thought to herself, I'm dead. Fortunately, she survived this challenge to her faith. However, Anne and 34 other believers were arrested and thrown into prison. They were beaten and left in miserable conditions. For 6 years, Anne survived this brutal environment, meanwhile sharing her faith with other prisoners. When they were released in 1945, a prison guard who was impressed by their courage shouted as they passed through the exit, "These are the ones who for 6 long years refused to worship Japanese gods. They fought against severe torture, hunger, and cold, and have won out without bowing their heads to the idol worship of Japan. Today, they are the champions of faith." Where did this young Korean school teacher get that strength? Where did she get that courage? Where did she find the confidence to withstand arrest and torture for her faith? She prepared herself by daily putting on the armor of God. Whatever battle you are fighting against depression or anger or unbelief, the battle has already been won in heavenly realms. God stands ready to fight for you today. It's already been won. Sin's been defeated. But that leaves us here on earth. And we're facing stress all the days of our lives. All you need to do to prepare yourself with the armor of God and stand firm while God works through you. There is nothing you cannot overcome if you rely on the strength and courage and confidence that comes from a relationship with God. But you have to be ready. You can't wait until the stress happens or the testing comes. You may want to use Jocko's one word, good. Let's get on with it. Let's go, Lord. For I have put your armor on, and I will stand firm with courage and confidence and strength given to me. Lord, for I know, because you told me, that you will never forsake me or desert me. Hebrews 13:5. So what's the takeaway from this lesson? The stress of life on this earth? Good. Let's get on it. With our focus on the kingdom of God and eternity with God as our mission. Now that's really good. And all God's people said,